What's wrong with this stupid wokeness? Some of these people need to go to a woke detox center or something. I mean, they're expressing a language that people just don't use, and there's a backlash and a frustration at that. And Terry got caught up. He's a good friend of mine. He's a good guy. He got caught up in something national. We got to change this and not be about changing dictionaries and change laws.
Political advisor James Carville with his take on what went wrong for Democrats in Virginia in Tuesday's governor's race. It echoes much of the Monday morning quarterbacking, which I vehemently disagree with, by pinning the blame on woke politics, specifically critical race theory, a graduate-level course not taught to anyone's 5-year-old. Still, Republicans and some centrist Democrats are successfully saying that this is what leveraged the power that Republicans were able to use to outrage parents to be successful in Virginia. Parents had fears that schools would start teaching this, and those districts have something in common. A study by NBC News found that schools facing critical race theory battles are the ones that happen to be diversifying the fastest. Virginia's Loudoun County is second in the nation in terms of the increase in the number of students of color in what had been a majority white school district. McAuliffe underperformed Biden's numbers in that county by 7 points. And Republicans are looking to copy the Virginia playbook for the 2022 midterms. In an election night letter to his caucus, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy listed education as a main plank of his party's plan to reclaim power, with promises to introduce a, quote, parents' bill of rights, writing, quote, if the Virginia results showed us anything, it's that parents are demanding more control and accountability in the classroom. Joining us now is former Republican Congressman David Jolly, national chairman of the Serve America movement and an MSNBC contributor, and Dr. Vida Robertson, director of the Center for Critical Race Studies at the University of Houston downtown and co-editor of the book, Critical Race Studies Across Disciplines. Thank you so much, Dr. Vida and David, for joining me today. David, I have to start with this, and this is a thing I have felt about critical race theory all along. To me, it is no different than the caravan or birtherism, and I hate the idea of platforming what is essentially a bad faith argument. But people seem to believe that it had an impact on Virginia. So as a former Republican and political advisor, what do Democrats do against what is inherently a dishonest and bad faith argument when it comes to politics?
In 2 words, ignore it. And what I mean by that, you use the word platform it. Look, Republicans want a culture war around this issue, but it's based on a lie. And I think the way Democrats should approach it is to acknowledge the concern of parents, even though it's based on a lie, to say, look, nobody's interested in teaching your kids what to think. But we do want to teach our kids how to think for themselves. And so that means including a broad spectrum of curriculum, but Republicans are telling you CRT's in and it's not. But there's no reason to play on the Republican playing field on this CRT issue. For the main reason, Jason, is because even if you beat them on that, Republicans are going to go down this road on another issue. They are bad faith players when it comes to culture wars, and they're going to engage in culture wars going into 2022. I think you just hit it, say it's a lie, move on, and deliver what is a more powerful message for Democrats. What is the issue? What is the message that's going to resonate more to parents? And that means meeting parents and meeting voters where they are, not where you want to take them to, right? Is it inflation? Is it COVID policy bouncing back and forth? Is it school parental control in schools? That's fine. Meet the voter where they are, but that doesn't mean you have to meet Republicans where they are.
Dr. Robertson, so again, the goal of Republicans from a rhetorical and a communication standpoint is anything you don't like, they want to call it critical race theory. Martin Luther King Day, Diwali, Hanukkah, they all want to call that critical race theory. Remind the audience again, because I looked you guys up in particular because you wrote a book about critical race theory across disciplines. You know, what is critical race theory just at its core? And secondly, is it something that you could even teach during a math class or an English class or something else like that to a bunch of 5-year-olds?
Well, thank you for the question, my brother. Critical race theory at its core is a theoretical approach and a framework of legal analysis that's based on the premise that race is not a natural or a biological feature of humanity. That is to say that race is not a noun, it's actually a verb. And as a verb, race is a sociological tool that's used to organize our society for the purpose of maintaining certain political, social, and economic disparities. Hence, critical race theory is a structural examination of race and racism by looking closely at our laws, our policies, our institutions, and our systems that govern our American society. So, of course, it takes me quite a while to even offer you this definition of critical race theory, so it could not possibly show up in a kindergarten classroom. It is in no part a part of the curriculum of our high school students or those in middle school. This is simply a facade. It is just an opportunity for Republicans to throw together all of our initiatives that are moving toward the diversification of curriculum, equity, diversity, and inclusion programs, and trying to smash them together for an easy defeat.
This amazes me. We have public schools. You know how hard it is to teach a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old to tie their shoes, and yet somebody thinks that teachers have time to do this? It doesn't make any sense. So, David, here's the other thing that sort of gets me about this. I wonder if, from the perspective of Democrats, we heard James Carville at the beginning. He's like, oh, my gosh, we got to do something about wokeness. We got to do something about defund the police. We got to do something about all these terrible ideas. When I hear that, as an African-American voter, what I hear is an older white guy saying, you black and brown people, shut up. That's how that sounds to lots of black and brown voters across the country. Yeah. And the Democratic Party suppresses the votes when they do things like that. So David, if you were having a conversation with centrist Democrats right now who are like, we got to get away from this stuff, what would you tell them about how these messages also can come across to the very base that you need to turn out enthusiastically for you to stay in power?
Yeah, look, James Carville comments don't help in this situation. Politics is a game of math. And when it comes to the current Democratic majority, it is a group of coalitions, right? Biden and Democratic leadership made certain promises to progressives, certain promises to moderates, and certain promises to never Trumpers. And as I heard one of our colleagues on NBC say recently, look, communities of color did not turn out because they really wanted a hard infrastructure bill and building bridges. What they wanted was what we're seeing in the larger bill. And I think it's important to recognize if you lose any one of these demographics within the coalition, not only are you probably on the wrong side of history, but you're also going to be on the wrong side of the election. But what I would finally offer any Democrat, moderate, conservative, whatever it might be, you might be right on the issues. You might have a very popular issue, paid family leave, community colleges, pre-K, but you might still be off message. And what I mean by that is what we learned is there were slightly more voters in some of these states who said, yes, that polls at 75%. But what I'm most concerned about is inflation and schools and COVID and these other issues. So for Democrats, don't lose your spirit over these issues that you're on the right side of, but recognize in elections, sometimes you've got to meet the voter where they are, not where you want them to be.
So, Dr. Robertson, this is something else, the data that NBC came up with, where school districts are diversifying is where you're seeing these sort of flare-ups of anger and racism. And my question for you is there a way possibly to perhaps turn critical race theory into a positive? And here's what I propose with that. There are some parents out there that love it when their kids come home and say, we learned about Hanukkah today. We learned about Eid today. We learned about Juneteenth today. That is something that a lot of parents are actually excited about. They love when their children come home with new friends and different kinds of things. While that is separate from critical race theory, do you think in a diversifying America that you could sell those who are resistant to that diversity on the excitement and joy that children seem to get from interacting with different kids when they go to school? Or maybe I'm just optimistic.
No, I think that's a brilliant point. Our whole educational system is built on the phenomenon that we as Americans must be aptly educated in order for us to lead ourselves in this beautiful democratic experiment. And it is only through that critical analysis of our history, where we as a nation got it right, when we are doing things well as the moments when we fell short, that we are ever going to be able to perfect our union, to be able to create and craft minds that are ready for the challenges of the 21st century. So I'm with you. Unfortunately, the Republican Party has done a great job at demonizing this incredible tool of analysis. But we would say that we as Americans must get back to the perfecting of our union. And education, as John Dewey would say, is at the heart of that perfection. That it's only when we learn to know one another, when we truly appreciate each other, are we ever going to be the America that we dream of.
I love that level of optimism. It's so rare. Thank you so very much. David Jolly and Dr. Vida Robertson, thank you for spending some time with us and giving us a positive vision of the future.